I'm Roger Baker, Executive Director of the Stratfor Center for Applied Geopolitics at RANE, a global center of excellence for geopolitical intelligence and analysis. Learn how you can put geopolitics to work for your organization at ranenetwork.com.
Hello and welcome to the Essential Geopolitics podcast by RANE. Today I'm joined by RANE's global security analyst Hellen Muzungu, who will provide insight into the current political and security situation in South Sudan. Hi Hellen, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So to start us off, do you want to explain what's been happening recently in South Sudan?
Yeah, sure. So there's been several indicators highlighting the gradual fallout between President Salva Kiir and his first vice president, Riek Machar, representing the opposition. So these indicators have led to fears that the country might be on the brink of another civil war. So just yesterday, the opposition, so the vice president's faction, announced that it was partially withdrawing from the 2018 peace process that ended the civil war, which is also under which this current government was formed. So this decision came after security forces loyal to the president arrested several cabinet members affiliated to the first vice president, as well as several senior army officials. So despite this being a jab at the first vice president, it also violates the peace agreement that I just talked about, as the president cannot fire or dismiss government officials in Machar's faction without basically the first vice president approving it. So these dismissals led to clashes erupting in Nasir in northern South Sudan, where the newer militia with ties to the first vice president captured an army base. There were incidents that led to significant casualties and heightened tensions between forces loyal to Kiir and Machar. And not to forget, the fighting has also displaced tens of thousands, and the involvement of the White Army militia, which is predominantly the Nuer that is affiliated to Machar, continues to intensify the conflict.
So what are the political structures and events that have kind of led us to where we are right now?
Okay, so briefly, these tensions have worsened since South Sudan postponed its December 2024 elections to December 2026 due to delays in implementing the peace agreement, particularly in completing security sector reforms, conducting a population census, finalizing the constitution-making process, and adequately resourcing election-related institutions. So since the postponement of the elections, mistrust between President Salva Kiir and his main rival Machar has deepened. Reports also state that Kiir is trying to consolidate his grip on power ahead of the 2026 elections. He's also reported to have dismissed some of his key officials within his own camp that are deemed as a threat to his presidency.
Who are the main actors involved, and what are the primary incentives and goals that are influencing the conflict?
Okay, so there are quite a number of actors involved, starting with the President Kiir and his loyalists seeking to maintain control over South Sudan's political and security landscape, and also prevent the first vice president from gaining significant political or military influence. Analysts also argue that this includes the loyalists include Ugandan forces recently deployed in the country to support Kiir to maintain control. The other main actor, as mentioned, is the first Vice President Machar, seeking to regain political leverage after being sidelined within the peace process, and also secure autonomy or a stronger power-sharing agreement for his faction. There's also the White Army, which is from the Nuer ethnic group that Machar also belongs to, that is mostly seeking revenge attacks for past grievances, and also target other militias. There are also regional actors such as the African Union, IGAD, and other international actors looking to help South Sudan resolve its issues. And finally, there's neighboring Sudan, whose factions in the ongoing civil war, that is the Sudan Army and the Rapid Support Forces, have varying interests in South Sudan, ranging from economic to territorial and more. But before I end, there's one more thing to note about Sudan as an actor in this, is that the governments of South Sudan and Sudan occasionally have sponsored proxy forces against each other, harboring or allying with rebels. And this is likely to happen given the reported ties between the RSF and South Sudan President Kiir. So the involvement of the Sudan Armed Forces and the RSF in South Sudan's affairs worsens existing tensions and complicates peace efforts. So if this continues to happen, there could also be a disruption to oil production and transportation, which would cripple South Sudan's economy and fuel additional unrest.
What would kind of a slide back into a civil war look like for South Sudan?
Yeah, so there are several factors already in place that would drive this. So recently the army announced and deployed troops to Nasir in the Upper Nile, which is in the north, to disarm the White Army that I just talked about. And the following days, it was obvious that it was unlikely that the armed groups loyal to Machar would agree to disarm, particularly as the disarmament was to be enforced by state forces loyal to the president. So as a result, further violent clashes occurred. And given that the opposition is largely based in Nasir, or the northern region, a historical center of resistance for the Nuer ethnic group, it's mainly perceived as though the government is attacking them, so targeting Nuer, which is the first vice president's tribe. So this would automatically deepen ethnic divisions, which we're already seeing. And in the coming months, such perceptions of targeting the Nuer could encourage further mobilization of armed youth along ethnic lines, potentially igniting a wider conflict. So I say this because in the 2013 to the 2018 civil war, it was largely fought along ethnic lines, with government forces dominated by Dinka troops and the opposition comprised of Nuer fighters. So if we see heightened confrontation going on, the already fragile peace agreement may collapse entirely, and this would result in a prolonged conflict or even the resurgence of a full-scale civil war with severe implications for regional stability, economic development, and humanitarian conditions.
You kind of touched on this a little bit, but could you explore a little further the possibility of this being resolved and what the ongoing political and security outlook is for the conflict?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing that needs to be done is the release of Machar allies, the allies of the first vice president, to reduce tensions. But there's also a huge need for dialogue and mediation between the president and the first vice president. So this would be mediated by regional or international actors, and they could facilitate negotiations to address the grievances and reinforce commitments to the peace agreement ahead of the 2026 elections. Because if this is not done, as I mentioned earlier, we could see South Sudan experience another civil war before even the elections are held. The other thing that could be done in the immediate term is initiating a ceasefire in the north, where there's clashes going on between the White Army and the security forces. So this would prevent further violence in the state, and it could also involve deploying neutral peacekeeping forces to buffer conflicting parties, though this may take some time and will require political will from both sides.
Thanks so much for sharing these insights, Hellen.
Thank you for having me.
Subscribers can read more of Hellen's analyses on our platform. To sign up, visit ranenetwork.com, where you can learn more about our suite of risk intelligence products and solutions. That's RANE network.com. Thank you for listening.